Okay, so this is going to be a tutorial on basically how to import a model into Unreal Engine 1 using 3ds to UNR. So this is basically just going to be, by request, a simple introduction to how to import models into Unreal Engine 1 using Unreal Editor 2.0, using Blender, using 3ds Max, and using 3ds to UNR. So this isn't really anything having to do with skeletal mesh, having to do with animations or bones or anything like that. We're just basically importing a model to understand the basic pipeline. And things like animation are sort of add-on features onto that. But I can also comment that Milkshape 3D and such other programs basically already have that set up to the point where you can understand that after using maybe a skeletal mesh or using the conventional way of doing it, the older way, you can basically use their pipeline to convert it into Unreal Editor 2.0. And in that way, not using 3ds to UNR is probably better for animation, or at least for models with bones and advanced animation. So this is just going to be a basic importing of a model. So suppose that you were purely in 3D Studio Max. You would of course just make your primitive in here. Now I will comment one thing about different versions. Say that you have the latest version of Blender or some older version of 3D Studio Max or vice versa. Then it might be the case that you will run into errors when dealing with some conversions. So maybe it would be in your interest to just model within one program, or make sure that there's a consistency between the versions of formats. Usually it's not a problem. But what we're going to do is, if you did import your model, you're going to want to name it a name and then append 0, 1 to it if it's not already like that. Now we just created a primitive, so what we're going to do is we're going to have to go to our modifier list, and of course you ignore this if you've already imported a model and it's already unwrapped, and then unwrap UV. Now sure, you can mess with a UV here, but because we don't really care about the texture, we just want to import it, you can do that later. Now in terms of UV mapping, because it's in the 3ds format, really the UV map doesn't really matter in terms of getting it to a certain point, as long as it's within the boundaries. And if I didn't mention it before, Unreal Engine 1 wants you to keep a 256 cubed boundary that your model will be inside. And if it's not, of course, you can either do one of two things, which is either scale it in the argument in 3ds to UNR, or you have to scale it within the program. But what we want to do now is we want to go to key 1 and add a key here. Then what we're going to do is go to snapshot, and we're going to go to range, and then we're going to take a snapshot with the amount of copies equal to the amount of frames, which is 1, and the clone method is going to be copy. Now we're going to export it to our root Unreal Tournament directory. Now you have to make a folder. I already have one, because it's basically the same way we compile U packages for Unreal. Now once you've done that, you pretty much are set to compile it using 3ds to UNR. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go to our command prompt, and then we're going to go to the directory where we saved that 3ds file. So basically go to your Unreal Tournament directory. Oops. So now we're in box, and you should make sure that you have 3ds to UNR inside there, as well as your box 3ds. So I'm just going to print out what 3ds2UNR does and its parameters. One thing that's interesting that you can do is you can scale it here. For weird models that you didn't work out to format out correctly beforehand, it probably won't work, but in some cases where you do need scaling, it will work. 3ds2UNR is kind of a sloppy program in terms of getting a model where it needs to be if it's a more complicated model. So basically, you need to make sure that your model is one mesh within 3ds Max before you export it, or whatever program you're using. And that's sort of the advantage of using a model program that already has the materials and the tools to export it directly into Unreal Tournament, Unreal Engine 1. But for basic models, I think this is a quicker method. And the reason why we needed to append the 01 to that model name is because Unreal sort of works with an instancing system, sort of numbering each instance by frame of the model. So each frame is essentially one instance, and that's why we're taking a snapshot of the model itself, because we're taking a snapshot actually of each instance, which is the frame. And that's how basically Unreal Engine 1 converts that into an animation. Now, I will want to comment on animation itself. If we were to animate a model, we would take the static model and animate one animation per file. So say you have 3 animations, that would be 3 files. And an idle animation that does nothing except have 1 frame, that would be the first and primary file. But we only have 1 file. So what we're going to do is we're going to say write 3ds2UNR and then the name of our model. Now, you should see that it at least imported 1 frame. If you didn't, then you did something wrong with the snapshot. And either it doesn't have the frame, or you didn't take the snapshot properly. So just make sure that it has either 1 keyframe or it has 1 snapshot that actually did create an instance, which you can move around. But since we have that, we can go to our Unreal Tournament directory and go into that file folder that we just made. So what we have here is basically, if you ever worked with Gold Source Engine, you basically add a bone and make an idle animation to import a static object. And it's sort of the same thing, except that you're taking instances literally and actually taking each shot of the frame. So again, within your models folder, you should see this. Now, if you don't have this set up and maybe for whatever reason it's not there and it doesn't show the models because it should automatically create it, then you might have wanted to set project with 3ds2UNR, which is the set project parameter. Then you go to your root directory, Unreal Tournament, and select your box, but I already have that there. Inside classes, you should see an automatically generated UC file. What's interesting here is that you need to make sure that it has a PCX file if you're going to import a texture. In this case, we're only importing the model. So once we have the model, we can actually add a texture to it. Now, before we import it, we're going to add a directive to import the texture. So texture import name, and it's going to look for basically a file or a directory with a file, acting as if this is the root directory. So we're going to say models box.pcx. Then we're going to say group skins, although it doesn't necessarily need a group, but I recommend you do have one, and then flags too. Now once you have that, we're going to go ahead and go into our Adobe Photoshop to make a quick 256 by 256 texture file. And this really depends on the size of your UV map. It needs to be, it can be, I believe, up to 1024, although I might be getting confused with another Unreal Engine. But just make a random 256 by 256 image. We're going to convert it into an indexed color, and then we're going to export it as a PCX. And we're going to go into that directory box, into models, and name it box.pcx, which is what we specified within the UC file. So it should be there. Now we're going to go back to our terminal, and we're going to go into System, and we're going to open Unreal Tournament INI. Then find Edit Packages, and we're going to add Box to that package. So you just add a new line with Edit Packages equals, and then the name of the folder with the 3ds file and everything in it. Then we're going to say UCC make now. Before I do that, you want to look at where you want it. Maybe you want it in decoration. I'm just going to put it in actor, which will again show it in the actor. Okay, I see what I did wrong. Yeah, so I'm sorry, the name of the texture is here, and then you want to specify the file. So that's why it's giving us a warning. This is still worked, but make sure that you have the name of the texture the file in Unreal Editor, and then the file itself here. It simply could not find the file. That's it. So if you did get that warning, you have to delete the box and then execute it again. Now you can notice that there were no warnings, and that it did successfully import the texture. So what you should see here is this weird texture that you made. Now, the thing about the scaling of any model in Unreal Tournament is that it needs to be in 256 units, which I will specify at the bottom of this tutorial on the web page. But once you are in Unreal Editor, of course, just create a primitive cube or something to put your box inside. And it should be quite small, actually, because we didn't scale it or anything. So there's your box, and you can see that it has a texture on it, which is the default texture. Now, the thing about this is that if you didn't UV map, or you didn't apply the texture correctly, or just something weird happened with the texture processing, then it should be green, and it should have a weird look to it, or it shouldn't have a texture at all, and you wouldn't be able to texture it when you go to display. But we can go to box, and of course you would just specify in default properties the skin here, but you can notice that it does work, and we do have our box here. So that is the basic pipeline for importing a basic model into Unreal Engine 1. I will want to comment, though, on the nuances of importing it through this pipeline. First of all, I would say that it's a lot better to import more advanced models through something that already has the tools. Milkshape 3D is better in some cases, and if you're using a skeletal mesh, then you might want to use another way, because 3ds to UNR does have a reputation of being weird with some models. For weapon models, I will want to say that there is a sort of feature that isn't really mentioned, and you might want to scale your model in such a way, if you're making a weapon model, that it is extremely small, comparatively equal to one of the weapon models in Unreal Tournament that's already imported. So what I mean by that is, if you go to your mesh browser, and let's say that you import something like Auto Hand, or rather the view, the first-person view of any weapon model, it'll of course look like a normal-sized object here. But say you go to, let's just change it in here. Say you go to your actual map and you use this, it's extremely tiny. And the reason why it needs to be very small is because you don't want it to basically intersect with any BSP when you're playing the game. So again, for weapon models, it needs to be comparatively small.